Most people assume you only learn a company's culture after you start the job. Workplace psychology suggests that's usually not true. Organizations tend to reveal their culture before you ever accept the offer, not through what they promise, but through what they say, what they avoid, and how they behave during interviews. Today, we're going to define what organizational culture actually is, and then walk through research-backed signals you can listen for during interviews that often predict culture problems before you experience them firsthand. Psychologists define organizational culture as the shared norms, assumptions, and behaviors that guide how work actually gets done, not what's written on the careers page or the mission statement. Culture shows up in everyday moments: how decisions are made, how priorities are set, who has influence, and what behaviors get rewarded. And this is the key point. Culture isn't learned from what organizations say, it's learned from what people consistently do. One of the earliest cultural signals doesn't come from hierarchy itself. It comes from how hierarchy is explained. In interviews, it's completely normal to hear things like, "That decision sits above this role," "Leadership sets that direction," or "There are constraints we work within." Those answers alone don't indicate poor culture. Every organization has boundaries. What workplace psychology pays attention to is what comes next. In healthier cultures, explanations of hierarchy are usually followed by clarity: who decides what, why decisions are structured that way, and where this role still has influence. That clarity matters because decision-making isn't just an organizational structure, it's a psychological signal. When people understand where influence lives, they can take responsibility without fear. In lower autonomy environments, decision-making is described vaguely or defensively, without rationale, without ownership, and without a clear sense of where judgment is expected. Research on autonomy and psychological safety shows that when people can't clearly articulate where influence lives, even within constraints, decision-making often feels risky rather than shared. A practical follow-up question sounds like this: within those constraints, where does this role typically have the most influence? Clear cultures can answer that directly. Cultures under strain tend to stay abstract. Another signal shows up in how work is described. In interviews, phrases like, "It's fast-paced," "Every day is different," or "You'll wear a lot of hats," are very common, especially in growing organizations. Those descriptions aren't inherently negative. In startups or evolving teams, blurred roles are often expected. What workplace psychology focuses on is whether busyness is paired with clarity. In healthier environments, people can explain what actually matters, how priorities are set, and how success is evaluated, even when work is complex. In lower clarity environments, busyness becomes a substitute for structure. Work is described as constant motion, but outcomes, boundaries, and expectations remain unclear. Research on role ambiguity consistently shows that prolonged vagueness is associated with higher stress, lower performance, and earlier turnover. A grounded follow-up question is, what would success look like for someone in this role after 6 months? Clear cultures describe outcomes, strained cultures describe activity. Another signal appears when you speak with multiple people during the interview process. If different interviewers describe the role in noticeably different ways, or priorities seem to shift depending on who you ask, that inconsistency matters. Workplace research suggests that misalignment at the leadership level often predicts siloed teams, internal friction, and unclear expectations downstream. This doesn't mean anyone is being deceptive. It often reflects unresolved strategy or competing priorities. Consistency matters more than enthusiasm. Alignment predicts stability. Pay close attention to how success is described. If top performers are framed as always online, never taking time off, or constantly going above and beyond, that framing matters. Workplace psychology consistently shows that when performance is defined by visibility or sacrifice, rather than outcomes, burnout risk increases dramatically. This doesn't mean effort isn't valued. It means endurance is being rewarded more than effectiveness. A useful question to ask is, what do your highest performers do differently? Pay attention to how that question is answered. Healthier cultures tend to describe impact, judgment, and results. Cultures under strain often focus on endurance, availability, or sacrifice. One of the most reliable predictors of culture is how the organization treats you before you join. Notice whether your time is respected, communication is clear, and follow-through actually happens. Workplace psychologists describe hiring as a reciprocal process, meaning candidates are evaluating organizations just as much as organizations are evaluating candidates. Because of that, the interview itself becomes one of the most reliable windows into culture. Organizations tend to behave during interviews the same way they operate internally, especially when it comes to communication, follow-through, and respect for time. Remember, you don't need to mind read or overanalyze. Workplace psychology shows that culture leaks through behavior, especially in low-stakes settings like interviews. The goal isn't to judge, it's to make informed choices. If this kind of analysis helps you make sense of work, or gives language to things you felt but couldn't explain, that's exactly what we do here. Subscribe to Uncommon Sense Lab for more science-backed insights into how work actually works.